Welcome to the Lover's Hole, and I would say this is episode 53, so happy anniversary. This is our official 1 year later since we first started reading through the Aubrey Matron books of Patrick O'Brian. So if you're a new listener, welcome. If you've been with us from the beginning, welcome back. And if you joined anywhere along the way, we're glad to have you, shipmate. So Ian, catch us up here.
Well, I'm going to say happy anniversary as well. Happy anniversary. Great to be here after a year. Who would have known we'd still be going after a year? Who would have known we'd have made such slow progress through these books? But it's great to savor them, isn't it? It's great to savor them. Where were we last time? In episode 52, Ray and Matchrid's relationship had taken a bit of a turn, a bit of a surprising turn. Jack was working through yet another difficult loss. Killick, God bless him, had saved the Chelenk. We got back to Katali. We met some old friends. Jack mangling some Greek and Italian, talking about the status of Thomas Pullings. Just at the end there, we were getting prepared for a bear hunt. So this time, Mike, it stands to reason we're going to meet the bear, and it's a real bear this time, not a costume. We're going to meet a talkative surgeon. We're going to learn that a surgery patient who's described as being a most romantic frame is actually the bearer of some surprising plot twists. And there's going to be more jeopardy for Jack, for Stephen, and for Laura.
Yeah, we're running up here to the end of Treason's Harbour. So once again, we had this happened last week, Ian. We have it again. It's a classic O'Brian move that we are, we're about to go on the bear hunt, and now the bear hunt's over as we join the action, and Jack is writing to Sophie, telling her they had found, in fact, a monstrous fine bear rearing up 7 or 8 feet tall, eyes flashing, red mouth foaming, hair on end, looking very like Admiral Duncan. So Admiral Duncan, I'm not sure if I were Admiral Duncan that this would be the way I'd want to be seen, but tell us, Ian, this is a real guy. Tell us about Admiral Duncan.
He absolutely was. A great characterization, apparently pretty realistic, absolutely dead on for time as well. Admiral Viscount Adam Duncan had been the commander of the British fleet at the famous Battle of Camperdown in 1797. He'd commanded the North Sea Fleet until 1801. Now, he was dead a good 8 years by the time Jack is sitting writing this letter to Sophie. But he absolutely would have been of the era when Jack was a junior officer, would have been the generation before Jack. He must have been an impressive guy physically and worthy of the bear simile, because when you do some looking about his life story online, you learn that he persuaded one ship's crew not to take part in the rather infamous Nore mutinies of 1797, thanks to, it says here, Duncan's personal influence and some happy displays of his vast personal strength. So thank you, Wikipedia, for that. I would love to know more about his displays of personal strength, but it sounds like he's worthy of the bear simile. And, Duncan gets mentioned, I think, in other places in the canon as well, in a very positive sense of a big, strong, resourceful, decent guy. So hopefully the bear metaphor was a respectful one.
Definitely a respectful one. I was going to say, I seem to recall Stephen talking about Duncan being like Nelson, one of these guys who's not been, completely corrupted by authority. Yeah. So a big bear who also, I guess, has bear hugs in store as well.
Oh.
So we're back to our original bear here. And, they've been hunting this bear with a pack of hounds. They've sort of got him. He's up here rearing. And right before they shoot him, Stephen points out that bears are gentlemen and says they must be dispatched with a spear. And so, they're all talking about, well, who's going to do it? And they think, well, since Matron pointed this out, we'll give it to Matron. But Matron says, no, I'm a man of peace, not a man of war. So now it's which man of war? Is it Sihon Bey? Is it Jack? Jack thinks it should be the Bey. The Bey thinks, no, Jack, you're my guest and we're big on hospitality. Then somebody else says, well, perhaps you should do it together. And as they're having this big conversation, the bear has kind of been slinking off into the very thick brush close by. So having agreed that the two of them would spear the bear together, Jack and the Bey go in alone into this thick brush. And the dogs now have kind of had all they want of this bear. So they're slinking in behind them. And Jack tells Sophie, I've never been so frightened in all my life, because they've got no hounds in front of them. They have no idea where this bear is. It's thick. They can't see very well. And then they finally break out a little bit, and about a quarter of a mile away, they spot Stephen up behind the bear, waving his hat and sending him quickly up the mountainside and out of danger. So I just love this. I think this is classic Stephen. Don't step on the scorpions. Leave the bear alone. Oh, but Jack, nevertheless, even though they don't get the bear, he tells Sophie how that day, even with a very indifferent pack of hounds, did lift my heart. So God bless him. Jack and a bear hunt here.
And Jack, of course, also loved the action off Corfu the next night, when the French had tried unsuccessfully to snap up a few ships in the convoy. He's glad to be back in waters patrolled by the British, and Babington's there, and we hear about young Host, Captain Host, who was mentioned a few episodes ago. And maybe here, Mike O'Brien seems to be poking a bit of fun at our hero, at our literal hero, Jack, and maybe at our sort of inspirational hero, Cochrane, a little bit. And he's showing how he's actually created Jack a little bit differently than role models like Cochrane. Because Jack here is writing about this guy, Host. He says, he's done wonders, a very active officer. I wish I could like him better, yet there's something of Sidney Smith about him, something a trifle self-congratulatory and theatrical. And then he does burn a shocking number of small prizes, which does him no good and the French no harm, but which does ruin the poor unfortunate men that own and sail them. This is strictly between ourselves, my dear, not to be repeated to anyone. And Mike, besides being another nice little bit of epistolary narrative of somebody's writing home, in this case to Sophie, self-congratulatory and theatrical, that's a pretty fair critique, I think, of some aspects of Cochrane's character. But overall, this is just classic O'Brien, isn't it? He moves from scene to scene. He moves from character to character. This chapter's got so much great O'Brien kind of stylings in it.
It's so true, and I'm amazed. And it's kind of fascinating because the book, it's got all of his signature moves. Chapter 9 especially seems to kind of pull out all the greatest hits. But this book, I'd be interested in what you think. There's also kind of a classic new thing here that I don't remember earlier in the canon us knowing so much that our heroes don't know. We certainly have had takes and views from other small side characters, but we've got kind of this whole running story with LeSueur and with Ray, and we know a lot more than Jack and Stephen are privy to. So it's kind of, even more suspenseful, more compelling as we go along here.
Yeah, suspenseful and compelling, exactly. The more we know, the more we're actually made anxious about the fact that our characters could be heading into danger. And this next little stretch of narrative, Mike, does this really cleverly. We're moving towards a bit of a key plot point here, and it's done in this very sort of sly, underhand way. And our eye is taken completely off the ball by the character of the surgeon from HMS Nymphe, this talkative surgeon who's invited Stephen to assist him. Jack mentions this and tells Sophie that he has to go out because Harry Cotton's barge from the Nymphe has arrived. His horse, old Coxon, he says, wheezing out, Nymphe, like an asthmatic grampus. And aboard the Nymphe herself, Dr. Maturin, who's been helping out with this surgery, leaned over the patient's, it says the patient's yellow, glistening, horror-filled face and said, there, it is all over now. With the blessing, you will do very well. And he's handing off here, isn't it? We've went from the Nymphe in one narrative to the Nymphe in another part of the present-day narrative. And he does this so well. He does it in lots of other places as well, but he's doing it really well here in Treason's Harbour. And this Grampus thing is really interesting. Engram gives it a high in 1807. Grampus is another name for a species of dolphin called Risso's dolphin. And I'm not sure what we're meant to make here of nymphs and dolphins and Risso, who is an Italian naturalist. Interesting.
Yeah, you do wonder. We join Stephen now aboard the Nymphe, as you say. We've gone nymph to nymph. And there's this hilarious scene. So just as we were saying, O'Brien ratchets up the tension. And now we're like, all right, a little bit of comic relief here. We've got this talkative surgeon, which takes our eye off the ball a little bit, So Jack mentions to Sophie, he just mentioned the talkative surgeon to Sophie, and now O'Brien kind of takes 3 pages telling the story of Mr. Thomas, the surgeon, talking about his next patient and never getting to the point for 3 pages. And it was hilarious to read. But I'm thinking about Stephen. It's got to be painful to endure listening through this in real life. So, right before this, they'd done an operation. A few other ship surgeons had come to watch Stephen's procedure. And as soon as they hear Mr. Thomas launch into the story, they all disappear. And Stephen's kind of left there because they're saying, they've kind of heard this before and they don't want to go through the pain again. And Thomas is asking Stephen to remove a wandering musket ball using Matron's famous suprapubic cystotomy. And he says this thing, which you had mentioned in kind of the prologue, Ian, that it's lodged just at the external edge of the levator anguli scapulae, and it presents no particular interest to the philosophical surgeon, but for the fact that it is lodged in a most romantic frame. Lodged in a most romantic frame. So we have to wonder what this is. Although I suspect Stephen's not wondering what it is. He's ready to get on with it. But then he starts these 3 pages, and perhaps this beginning paragraph can give you a feel for what follows. Well, now, some time ago, we were off Pola steering southwest with a light breeze at north or thereabouts, very early in the morning, or perhaps I should say late at night, before the idlers had been called. In any case, and in passing, may I observe that it's tolerably whimsical to speak of them as idlers, more whimsical, if anything, than calling the master, purser, and surgeon non-combatants. I'm sure that when I was surgeon's mate in the old Andromeda, or assistant surgeon, as we say nowadays, and indeed it's far more proper, mate having a certain colloquial, familiar connotation, by no means suitable for a member of a learned profession, I am sure I went away in cutting out expeditions or in sweeps along the coast in the yawl. Well, twice I had command of the yawl, or in the barge more often than, say, the great majority of the line of battleship meds. But as I was saying, or at all events intended to say, ... I think many of us, especially those of us who spend some time growing up in the South, have been in the middle of one of these conversations. And I suspect it's kind of a universal phenomena in different countries across the world.
I'm sure it is. And if any of our listeners are fans of the British comedy TV show Derry Girls, set in 1980s Derry or Londonderry in Northern Ireland, there's a character in there called Uncle Colm, and I'm going to just play a bit of audio now of Uncle Colm, and just what a conversational vacuum this guy is.
There you are.
He spade us. Run, girls, save yourselves.
John over there was just saying, you know John, lovely fella, married to Patricia, I think it is, and her mother worked in the credit union, you might remember. Absolutely crippled with the old gallstones, so she was.
Christ almighty.
And the gallstones, well, now, they're no joke. Neighbour of mine, Dickie Donegan, by God, he was tortured with the gallstones, the size of golf balls they were.
And what did John say, Colin, for the love of God? What did he say?
He was telling me there, John was, that every bean in the place is talking about Sarah's frock.
Oh, really? Jesus, but this is an ordeal.
Well, at least I got a good day for it, Mary. I'll tell you, I was at one there up in the cathedral last week. By God, the wind could have cut you in two. Fierce it was. And now, I don't mind a bit of a breeze. If anything, I prefer it. But dawn was aggressive. And I says to myself, says I, Colin, this is no day for a do. And as it turns out...
Can I just stop you there, Colin?
Surely, Mary, go ahead.
Oh, no, I've nothing to say. I just really, really need you to stop talking.
So, but as I was saying, or at all events intended to say, there we have, maybe Uncle Colm is recreating the character of Mr. Thomas, the talkative surgeon. So, we've been completely blindsided, Mike, by this funny and really quite distracting rambling of the talkative Mr. Thomas, who I think might have the occasional flash in his character of James Guthrie, who was the real-life surgeon of Thomas Cochrane, who was quite fond of his own role in taking boats ashore and cutting out actions. This story that he was going to go on to tell was about how this patient, this romantic frame, came to be on the Nymphe. It includes the surgeon's fishing outing and how he was going to catch the fish and cook it and who he was with and what the Nymphe did while they were in the fishing boat and the different kind of sails. And anyway, Stephen's attention, just like ours, wanders for a page and a half until he hears, but to cut a long story short, followed by some more disconnected details of what was happening on the chase and the Nymphe and how the Nymphe had rudely told him to get his tackle out of the way and what he dosed the offending person with the next day, and much worse attempts at fail humour than Jack Aubrey's. And he talks about this Jack-in-the-Box who comes aboard when the chase is captured. And this Jack-in-the-Box turns out to be a former member of the crew of the Nymphe, had escaped from the French, rowed out, spotted the English ship, been taken by another French ship, chased by the Nymphe, only to turn out to be a former member of the Nymph's crew. Rescued by his very own ship, says Uncle Colm / Mr. Thomas. If that ain't romantic, I don't know what romance is. And Stephen, maybe some of us are guessing, Stephen still doesn't know who the patient is and is just ready to get on with this operation. So he seems to blow off the doctor with all of his, sure, Beavis of Hampton's nothing to this person. And this is, I think, a reference to a very long-winded and involved English romance poem from the 1300s about multiple generations of the hero's family. Anyway, yet another poetic reference for O'Brien just to drop in the midst of a really busy chapter. So Stephen's quite delighted at the idea of operating on somebody who's in high spirits, and Thomas mentions that this patient is now actually very low, quite melancholy, having heard the Valetta gossip about his wife. And after all the earlier detail, Thomas cannot put into words what it is about the patient's wife's behaviour that upset him. And we're getting the alarm bells now, Mike, but Stephen still has no idea what Thomas is on about, and he's ready to move on when a marine servant comes in with a message from the patient, Mr. Fielding, asking why he hasn't seen the doctor yet. Stephen asks Mr. Thomas if the patient is Lieutenant Charles Fielding of the Navy. And Mike, here comes the plot twist, delivered offhand by a worse than secondary character in a throwaway remark. Why, yes, says Thomas, I said so. Do you not recall? Charles Fielding, the husband of the lady with the dog that is so fond of Captain Aubrey. So you had not smoked it? Well, some of us hadn't smoked it, but we're smoking it now. You had not gathered my meaning? How droll. But hush, not a word. Dum, dum, dum.
Dun, 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 indeed. Oh my gosh. Charles Fielding is here out of all of that 3 pages of nothing stuff, right? So O'Brien had just concealed this from us brilliantly, from, all the way from his romantic frame up until now, this minor secondary Surgeon Thomas, and bam, big plot point here. So now what happens? Stephen and the surgeon go in. They find Fielding. Fielding seems to have added his own liquor to Thomas's mandragora preparation. And they had a little conversation that kind of suggested that Stephen did not approve of the use of mandragora. Now, I don't know about everybody else, but this immediately brought to my mind Harry Potter and company replanting mandrake roots in the movies and the books. It's
wow.
hallucinogenic. Yeah, it's a narcotic. It can be poisonous, but it was used at this time to treat a good many things, including pain. And I think Stephen was somehow doubting the choice, but now on top of that, he's also got a bit of alcohol. And Fielding does seem to be a bit remote, but is a really good patient. He kind of, volunteers to have his arms tied, steps right up. And as he's recovering, the surgeon's going to send the loblolly boy in, but Stephen says, no, I'll sit with him. I'd kind of like to hear about his escape. And Fielding tells him about escaping with 2 other officers, what a harrowing journey they make, that they've kind of have to only go out at night, that it probably, while it took them 76 days, it probably was only a week's ride that they actually went. But in the midst of it, they were caught in a snowstorm in the mountains. One of them died in that snowstorm. Another's foot was frostbitten. They had 2 days where they had absolutely no food, and they were trying, not all 3 of them had previously tried to escape and go to the Channel. This time they were trying to go the other way to kind of get to Austria and the Adriatic, since the Channel, everybody had gotten captured going that way. So they had become desperate along the way. They had this savage hatred for their pursuers. They had these fierce arguments with each other. And now, 2 days after thinking they were about to be in Austria, they realize they're in French-occupied Italy. There's kind of no place for them to hide. There's nothing for them to scrounge to eat. And the last of his companions is cut down by the cavalry. And Fielding alone is kind of, he's hiding underwater in a marsh as this cavalry goes by. And Fielding's telling Stephen, I was buoyed up by a particular sentiment, and I should have walked twice as far if my feet had held out. And I believe the same applied to others. And when I think of all the hardships they bore in vain, upon my honor, I see no justice in this world. It is not to believe that both their wives were whores. So this is this, whoa, oh my gosh, all this harrowing thing. These people died. Fielding sort of saying, I was kind of no help to them. They lost their lives. And now we realize that this is what's got his attention, Fielding's attention, that I'm the guy who lives and my wife's been a whore. I'm hoping this didn't have anything to do with Jack's letter back, but I think hopefully by that time Fielding had escaped, because Stephen's kind of thinking back, let's see, 2.5 months. Yeah, that's when we had these forged letters. But Stephen doesn't say any of this to Fielding. He just says that he had the pleasure of meeting Mrs. Fielding and attending her musical evenings. And Fielding's kind of in another kind of just dagger to the heart, says, well, perhaps that was the trouble. She's a great musician, and I cannot make out God Save the King on a penny whistle. So my heart goes out for this guy, to this grueling ordeal, now only to find out, he kind of wishes he was back in prison rather than finding out that his wife has been unfaithful to him.
Oh, man. And we got this is really great story, this vignette of the really grueling escape of Fielding, which could have filled a book all by itself. It actually reminds me that it might be slightly inspired by a real book, which has a sailing connection. Eric Newby, who wrote The Last Grain Race, about his experience sailing clippers around the world in the 1930s, served in the Second World War, and was a prisoner of war and escaped. And his book, Love and War on the Apennines, sounds actually like it has a pretty similar storyline to the experience of Charles Fielding. But and Eric Newby's a great writer, and if anybody wants to check it out, Love and War in the Apennines, written in 1971, so would have been absolutely current in the time when O'Brien was writing these books. Anyway, that's to one side. Back on the surprise, Jack, bless him, who was still trying to be, goodwill to all men, wonders why his friend Captain Cotton of the Nymphe looks so constrained, furtive, awkward, and hangdog. And since he and Cotton were midshipmen together, he's pretty at ease in Cotton's company. He asks if he's sick or vexed. Cotton says he has some unpleasant news. Charles Fielding, as we know now, a former prisoner, is aboard the Nymphe. And bless him, Jack, to begin with, is completely delighted. He says, well, this isn't bad news. What's the bad news? And Cotton's really confused because he's heard the rumor, as everybody has, about Jack and this presumed rumored affair with Mrs. Fielding. And Jack laughs straight away. He says, it's all nonsense. It's all because of the dog. Jack writes a note to Charles Fielding and offers to take him directly back to Malta. Stephen returns right after Jack gets the answer to his note. And he tells Stephen that someone had told Fielding that Jack was his wife's lover, and Jack apologizes for not consulting Stephen first before offering Fielding passage, because I think Jack now realizes, to use his favorite phrase, he's on a bit of a lee shore. Stephen, meanwhile, says, well, there was no need to consult me. Sometimes you misinterpret my actions. I think Stephen's trying to downplay his role as a sort of all-knowing Svengali. And in the note that Fielding writes back, Fielding turns down the offer of transport to Malta, but pretty seriously and directly challenges Jack to a duel soon in Malta. Stephen tells him there's no use trying to persuade Fielding. He asks Jack if Surprise will be the first ship back to Malta with the news of Fielding's escape, and Jack assures him that they will be, but it won't be too fast since they have Babington's vile tub with them. And in this really awkward and solemn silence, Jack reflects all the way back to the world of Post Captain. He had fought the odd duel in his time, but he had disliked them then, and he disliked them even more now that it was almost always a matter of pistols, generally more deadly than the sword. They seemed, that's duels, seemed to him foolish and even wicked. And Mike, this is a lovely Aubrey turn of phrase here. He had not the least wish to make Laura a widow, and even less to do the same to Sophie. And Mike, this is a really solemn end to a chapter that started out with so much kind of slapstick humour. Bondon comes in to announce that the barge is alongside, and Jack is so dislocated he can't even remember why. And Bondon says he's eating with Babington aboard the Dryad in 5 minutes. So, Jack's got to shake this all off. He's got to go and spend time eating with Babington. Mike, maybe this is a good time for us to shake it all off and go and grab a bit of light refreshment. What do you say?
I think it's a brilliant idea. Let's do.
If you're enjoying the podcast, please come and join our supporters on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/lubbershole.
Welcome back. We're starting Chapter 10 in Treason's Harbour, and Jack aboard the Surprise and Babington aboard the Dryad are spread out, sailing together. They're spread out to try to spot potential prizes or potential enemies. And Stephen is looking at one of his favorite creatures in all the sea. He's looking at dolphins. And O'Brien writes, the same troop with two exceptionally fat, profusely spotted dolphins in it had appeared several times before. He knew most of the individuals, and he was convinced that they were aware of his presence. He hoped that they would recognize him and even like him, and every time they rose, he waved. And O'Brien tells us that, the sea is pretty choppy right now. The ship is going up and down. Stephen's been out here for hours watching these dolphins here. And occasionally as the ship drops, there's this big wall of water, and Stephen's looking through the water, O'Brien writes, as if looking through the side of some immeasurable tank. Again, still watching the dolphins. And Stephen is really happy here. He's delighted because he's already in his mind figured out what he's going to do. He was worried about Fielding being back, about Laura Fielding, about what's happening on Malta, but he's decided as soon as he gets back, since they'll be the first to arrive, he will act very quickly. He'll tell the Admiral, he'll tell Ray. Laura Fielding will arrange a meeting. They can follow her to find her contacts, LeSueur and others. They'll follow their contacts, and they'll quickly pin all the French agents in Malta. And he, meanwhile, have gotten Laura to safety in case any of their extended network escape. So he's enjoying this. He's so delighted to finally have a way to wrap up the French situation on Malta when Calamy interrupts him to remind him that he's got to entertain the captain. And Stephen is just out of it and makes a bunch of comments about how am I going to do that. Calamy reminds him the gun room is hosting the captain.
There's always a meal, isn't there? There's always a meal to drag anybody out of a sense of glumness, and especially the gunroom that features friendly folk like Calamy. Now, at this particular dinner, Jack is glum. He's in a pretty low mood. We know he's missing Thomas Pullings, and he's also heartbroken by the fact that all these people in this happy mess society that he's sitting with could be broken up. And the text said, Jack had a strong sense of his life being upon the turn between two seasons, and as it were, with certainties of the one no longer valid for the other. He was not a fanciful man, but for some time now he had had an indefinable sense of chaos following order, of impending disaster, and it oppressed his mind. And Mike, this is the same anxiety about impending doom and about good things followed by bad that's been haunting Jack for many novels now. But on this occasion, the drinking, the good food, the company raise his spirits. Young Calamy sings Nelson at Copenhagen, and everyone joins in the chorus.
Copenhagen, he began his grand design. His tales with usual courage, the ballad Dryad did display. They destroyed the Danish navy upon that glorious day. With their thundering and roaring, rattling and roaring, thundering and roaring bombs.
Maclean, the new Marine officer and gunroom caterer, had started a verse in praise of currant jelly for breakfast. And at that moment, the lookout reports that Dryad has seen a ship, HMS Edinburgh, with our old friend, Captain Heneage Dundas.
So it's kind of nice. They report it's Dundas. Sure enough, next paragraph, Dundas is reporting out to Jack that he would be in a better mood if he hadn't just missed this French privateer he chased all day, which had pulled under the guns at Taranto. And he tells Jack that there have been storms in the Gulf of Lion, and these storms had kind of scattered the blockading squadron as far south as Mahan. Some of them are repairing there, and some of the French have stolen away. But the big news is that Hart and the commander-in-chief Ives have fallen out, and that Hart is now going home. Nobody's sure whether he's been kind of superseded, whether Hart had pulled down his own flag and jumped on it, as some had reported, whether he's being invalided, sent back in disgrace. Nobody really knows. Now, Dundas, like many people, will not miss him, thinks he's a horrible commander of men and ships and himself, and also says that, Dundas knows from his brother that Hart is now incredibly rich, kind of clearing $8,000 a year with his inheritance, and will likely never, ever go to sea again. Even with his kind of patronage from his son-in-law, Ray, we're likely done with him.
Yeah. And Mike, this is great. First of all, we all have a bit of schadenfreude in respect of Admiral Hart, but also there's this drumbeat. We're in chapter 10. It's the last chapter of the book, and there are a few things going on here that make me think I can hear the build-up now towards some final climatic action. And the first thing is, raising of the spirits, because we hear of the problem with Admiral Hart. And what's the thing that always happens to Jack Aubrey's ships when their fortunes are about to turn? They spot a prize. So that night, the surprise chasers, as the Dryad cuts the chase off from land, the Dryad loses her jib boom, but nonetheless cuts off the chase, who's heading south. And Mike, we get a scene that we've seen many times before. The chase starts her water over the side, jettisons her boats, her anchors, her cannons. Meanwhile, the surprise is matching her, pumping out 20 tons of water, and by dawn, the surprise was within musket shot of this privateer. And the crew, I love this idea that the crew are often just slightly judging Jack. The crew this time are giving Jack meaningful looks pointed in the direction of the bow chasers. Let's get this guy caught so we can start breakfast and stop messing around. And Mowat, meanwhile, wants to get on with cleaning the decks. So Jack, obeying proper form, asks the gunner for a shot that's wide, but not too wide. And a hole appears in the chaser's topsails, therefore topsail splits and she strikes her colours. And Mike, this feels like, okay, job done. We've taken care of this business now. But Stephen comes on deck. He's surprised to see his ship under the lee in the morning. He notices, Stephen being a lubber, that it has 3 masts and it's not the Dryad. Well spotted, Stephen. Jack gives him joy of the prize and invites him to a late breakfast. And he says, Rowan is going to take this prize into Malta. Now, this sounds like great news, and that the crew are back to their piratical ways, and Jack's taken a prize, and that's always a signal of good times. But Stephen is concerned about what this means for the timing of the arrival of news in Malta. He's concerned that hopefully this vessel will not arrive before the surprise does. He tells Jack it is of great importance that the news of Fielding's escape should not be known in Valetta before I am there. And Mike, just like the closing chapters of Post Captain, I get this really cold chill around my heart when Jack misinterprets this as being to do with Stephen's lustful apparent connection with Laura Fielding. I see, said Jack rather coldly. Well, I can make sure of that. And off they go. Given the damage to Dryad's sails in this chase, he doesn't see how either ship can beat the surprise unless they meet another ship and the news gets passed on that way.
Stephen's feeling pretty confident because he knows Jack is infallible when it comes to things in the sea. But he's shocked when they arrive in Malta Sunday afternoon. First off, he sees that Commander Ives' ship is not there. And the Dryad is there. And seeing that, O'Brien writes, is a shock which cut his breath short. Even worse, he learns that the Dryad has been there since Friday. And as he's looking, they're Liberty men. A bunch of people from the ship are going over the side. So, the officers have certainly had time to be out all weekend. Liberty men are now going ashore, and he's really worried about Laura. So there's been a signal for the Surprise's captain, to kind of repair a board. And Stephen walks straight into Jack's cabin, doesn't knock. Jack's dressing, and he asks for an exception to the no liberty till the captain reports rule. Stephen assures him it's a proper exception, as Stephen says, upon my honor. Jack agrees that he'll let him go ashore, but tells him that given the way his number kind of, once he reported his number, he was called in, they're probably going to be watering and heading straight back to sea as soon as they complete their water.
Jack still, I think, has really strong doubts at the back of his mind as to what Stephen's motivation is, but it's a measure of their friendship that he accepts this idea of the proper exception.
Right.
Meanwhile, not only Chekhov's gun, but Chekhov's surgical knife. Stephen grabs a pistol and a heavy surgical knife and heads for the shore in Valetta. On shore, Stephen heads up these steps called the Nix Mangiare steps. These are the steps that are the quickest way from the harbour up into the Valetta town, which is sort of up on a promontory. Nix Mangiare is what the beggars all used to say there when they gathered there, crying out, Nix Mangiare, which means I have nothing to eat. It's a pretty dicey pathway at the time. Lots of people would go the extra 200 meters to avoid these steps, but this is the way that Stephen goes to be direct. He learns that Ray is in Sicily. And this shatters all of the plans that he was starting to build in his head about handling the Charles and Laura Fielding situation. And he had thought about Ray's warning that no one could be trusted, possibly even someone in high command. And of course, there's a big irony here because we all know that Ray's the one who can't be trusted. And Stephen's really, I think he's thinking like at 1,000,000 miles an hour here. He comes across Babington and Pullings and Martin, and they see him and tell him to come with them before the storm starts. But seeing this famous reptilian glare in Stephen Maturin's eyes, they let him past.
Yeah. This is, you can just see Stephen on full alert now. He's rushing down the streets. This hailstorm starts. Actually, kind of luckily, everybody's kind of scrambling for shelter. So they're all kind of hiding right in front of Laura's original entryway there. Stephen kind of is in with the crowd, so he's hidden from any French watchers watching the house there. As the hail stops and the rain is starting, Stephen, he knocks, he doesn't hear any Ponto, and he finds the spare key that he knows exists. So he goes into the first door and passes the yard, and he sees a new high dirt mound with some flowers around it in the yard. Kind of curious. We're a little worried here. Gets in, there's a lamp burning in Laura's room. And Stephen kind of looks around and sees it all looks in order and kind of has the impression that it's probably as she left it not all that long ago. He's looking at Charles's portrait, which is exactly who he was just staring at on the nymph, looks just like him. And he thinks, you know what, Laura's going to be one that's going to have to handle them when this is all said and done. He hears the Franciscan's bell off, kind of in the monasterial ways, and he sits at the piano looking out at that mound again, which looks so much like a grave in the lightning flashes. And Stephen starts praying the prayer for protection in the nighttime and kind of playing that plain chant psalm that will be the Franciscan's first one on the piano. But then thinks, the piano's not quite the thing for plain chant, and he stops. And his kind of intelligent agent skills kick in because he listens. There's this metallic grating. Someone he recognizes is picking the outside lock. Two men come up the path with dark lanterns. Stephen moves back into Laura's bedroom, hiding behind an undrawn curtain. In Stephen's experience, people just don't think about that. And these men They're talking in French. They're wondering why she isn't back, that the party she's at should be over. Maybe it's the rain. They really can't wait long. They've got a meeting, and maybe they're going to have to send someone back in the middle of the night to do her in. One of them unshields a lantern, and Stephen instantly recognizes Lesueur from Laura and Graham's description, and Boulay, who is a citizen there. And this guy is very high in Hildebrand's administrative staff. So Stephen's saying, okay, here's this guy that's a plant on Hildebrand's staff. Here's Lesueur. And Stephen thinks, I should jump out, take them with the pistol and, my surgical blade. But he's thinking this blade could come in very handy later, what he might know about this. And so he does not. Well, the two of them continue to talk about who to send back. Lesueur wants somebody who will be quick and clean, not these people who are going to take pleasure. It's clear that he really hates having Laura Fielding killed. Stephen learns a little bit about the multiple French networks on Malta, listening to the two men talk. And he also learns that they have come here directly from out of town. So it's good. They did not realize that the frigates had arrived. And obviously, they don't realize how much time Laura may have been here and have gotten the word so far.
Wow. So, Mike, it's a bit like being back in Boston, right? In Fortune of War. We've got this really immediate, short-term, real-time danger, and we're really set up for a great close to this book. We've got Laura and Stephen and how they can escape from being done in by Lesueur and Boulay and the agents that are in Malta. We've got Charles Fielding and how can he and Jack coexist without there being some kind of a duel. We've got the news of Admiral Hart's departure, and what does that mean for what's going to happen now in the Mediterranean? Are we done with Hart? And what about the story of the Surprise? Is Surprise going to slink home with a broom at her masthead, or is there one last action in play for HMS Surprise?
Yeah, we kind of wonder, because this seems to be an urgency of turning Surprise around very quickly. I wonder what's going on there. I suspect the only way we're going to find out is to pick up Patrick O'Brian again next week to finish Chapter 10. Ian, what do you think to a little bit more Patrick O'Brian next week?
With all my heart.
This is no day for a do.